Welcome back to Killer Stories. I'm your host, Bobby Holmes. This week's episode is sponsored by Bar Forte of Kaysville, Utah. Bar Forte is a woman-owned boutique bar fitness studio, the first in Davis County, located in Kaysville, Utah. The owners, Cindy and Janelle, are not just business partners, they're best friends and fitness enthusiasts. They met teaching bar and shared a dream of owning a studio of their own. Bar Forte combines the best of ballet, yoga, and Pilates foundational principles, which focus on isolating, overloading, and stretching each muscle group, resulting in improved strength, posture, and balance. They strive to create a comfortable environment and ensure that new and seasoned clients feel like they belong, both in and outside of class. Bar Forte opened on July 30th. Cindy, Janelle, and their staff are eager to connect with their community and build an awesome clientele. Take advantage of their new client deal and try them out. 2 weeks of unlimited classes for just $10. Find them on Instagram at Bar Forte Kaysville and click the link in their bio to purchase this offer. I will also have the link in my show notes. One thing I really love about Bar Forte is how the instructors will help correct your movements and posture during class. I'll admit I require a lot of corrections, but I don't mind because then I'm sure to be working the right muscle groups. Unless, of course, you don't want hands-on correction, then they offer a red bracelet, no touchy bracelet, to be worn during class. The point is, the instructors help make sure you are comfortable and getting the most out of your workout. If you live in Davis County, you need to check out Bar Forte Kaysville. This week, I wanted to cover a Utah case to help lure my local listeners into Bar Forte. This particular case went unsolved for 24 years. And not just unsolved as in who done it, but the victim went unidentified. This proves it really does take a village. Law enforcement needs help from the public. If you know something, say something. That is why at the end of Dateline and America's Most Wanted, they have hotlines for you to call with information. You never know, no matter how big or how small, your tip could be the one that breaks the case. April 20th, 1998, a motorist found a female body near State Route 276 on the north end of Lake Powell, Utah. Those who aren't familiar with the area, this is the desert. He pulled over to pick up what seemed like a rolled-up rug on the side of the road. It stuck out like a sore thumb against the dry brown foliage. But to his horror, inside was a body wrapped up in plastic and duct tape. The woman was zipped inside of a blue sleeping bag and then rolled tightly in a rug bound together with rope. Pretty gruesome discovery for the man. He immediately called the police. Her cause of death was a gunshot wound to the head. All of the woman's fingertips were cut off in an attempt to hide her identity, which worked. Details describing Jane Doe were released to the public in hopes someone would recognize her and come forward with information. She was thought to be Native American or Hispanic, with facial freckles and several moles, most notably one on her right ear. She had brown eyes and brown shoulder-length hair. Her eyebrows were tattooed and had extensive dental work. Unfortunately, no one recognized the woman. She became simply known as the Maidenwater Victim. She was given this name because the motorist found her near Maidenwater Spring, a small body of water north of Lake Powell, Utah. The Maidenwater Victim case continued to grow cold. Nearly 20 years later, in 2017, investigators had a lead into who could have murdered Jane Doe. Scott Lee Kimball is a serial killer with 4 confirmed victims and thought to have been responsible for 21 others. He disposed of bodies in a very similar way, rolling them up in a rug. He knew how to tie very intricate knots like what was found with the rope in this case. Not only that, but Kimball was actually in Utah during the time the Maidenwater Victim was murdered. He was in town for a family reunion and claims he killed a hitchhiker while there. just 10 miles from where Jane Doe was found. I know serial killers are out there blending in with society, but how crazy would it be to find out this guy was just chilling at your family reunion? So creepy. While Kimball confessed to killing a hitchhiker in Utah, he was adamant it was not the Maidenwater victim. Kimball is a convicted killer who is never getting out of prison. He openly admits to his crimes. I'm not sure why he would feel the need to lie if he was indeed responsible. What difference would it make? Of course, police aren't just going to take his word for it, though. They issued a warrant to collect Kimball's DNA for comparison to foreign DNA found on the rope used to bind the rug. It was not a match. Scott Lee Kimball was not their guy. He will have his own episode at some point, though. The man is quite the monster. In 2018, Jane Doe finally had a name, solved by, and this is my favorite part, a true crime-loving internet sleuth in California. They called her a cold case hobbyist. She spends her free time reviewing cold cases and trying to solve them. The Utah State Bureau of Investigation reopened the case and released a post-mortem photo of the Maidenwater victim. This wasn't done initially because it's quite grim to show the face of a deceased person, especially one that was shot in the head, but they were desperate to identify her. Sketches that were made had no response. Many media outlets declined to run the post-mortem photo, but some were willing. The tipster noticed the mole inside of the victim's right ear and remembered seeing it before. In a picture of a missing woman in Ohio, 37-year-old Lina Reyes Geddes. If you are watching on YouTube, you can see the photo of Lina that Ohio investigators used in their missing person report. I won't be sharing the postmortem photo. Based solely on a hunch from a true crime enthusiast, Lina's family was contacted in Mexico. They never stopped searching for Lina when she went missing back in 1998. Her sister, Lina Reyes, drove to Utah so that her DNA could be compared against Jane Doe's. After all this time, her identity was finally confirmed. She told police, quote, "The biggest thing I longed for was to find her. I'm here to bring her home, not like I expected, but I'm bringing her back home with me," unquote. Lucero was only 11 years old when Lina went missing. She took Lina's remains back to Mexico so she could be put to rest at a proper gravesite. This was a huge break in the case. Now that they know the identity of the victim, perhaps it could help lead them to the killer. Lina Reyes was born and raised in a small Mexican town. She was a dedicated ballet dancer who graduated college with a degree in international business. As an adult, she relocated to the States, living in New Mexico. This is where she met Edward Geddes in 1996. Edward and Lina started dating, and their relationship turned serious pretty fast. She was in her mid-30s, and Edward was a bit older. I can't find his exact age, but he had a solid head of white hair in their photos together. Within 6 months of meeting each other, the couple married and relocated to Toledo, Ohio, then moving once more to a suburb of Youngstown where Edward owned a business. The couple had only been married for 2 years when Lina disappeared. She was taking a trip to visit family in Mexico. According to her flight itinerary, she was to fly out of the Pittsburgh International Airport with a stop in Dallas, Texas, before her final destination in Mexico. Edward says he dropped her off at the Pittsburgh airport, kissed her goodbye, and that was the last time he ever saw her. She carried with her a suitcase, a makeup bag, and a blue sleeping bag that was a gift for her little cousin Paco. But the strange thing was that Edward, or Eddie as his friends called him, did not report Lina missing. Her family called from Mexico and filed the missing person report 5 months after the fact. You'd think Eddie would be concerned that his wife never made it to her destination and seek help from authorities. He was not even interviewed about her April disappearance until October. Of course, this was a red flag to investigators and Lina's family, but a body was never found, or so they thought. So this case was not treated as a homicide. For all they knew, she could have willingly left. There was no evidence that pointed to foul play or that Eddie was responsible for her disappearance. Lina's parents and sister were worried sick about her. They knew that she would never abandon her life. She kept in touch regularly and was very excited for the upcoming trip. Days turned into weeks, months, and years. Forensic science in 1998 was still in the early stages. There were small traces of foreign DNA found on the rope used to bind the rug. At this time, the samples were too small to use for testing, and they didn't even have a suspect to test against, until Scott Lee Kimball, who was later ruled out. But now that they know who the victim is, they can look into new potential suspects. Lina's family had always believed Eddie was responsible, but couldn't prove it. Advancements in forensics allowed these samples to be retrieved from the rope using a type of wet vacuum, similar to how a shop vac works. A little more scientific than that, but you get the gist. There were actually skin samples from 2 different men found on the rope. One was ruled out as the not expert who unintentionally contaminated the evidence. Whoops. And the second sample was presumed to belong to the killer. Naturally, police look at the husband, Eddie Geddes. The problem here is that Eddie was dead and had been for 17 years. He committed suicide in 2001 by shooting himself while in Nevada. Eddie was cremated after his death, meaning there was no DNA of Eddie's left to test. Police convinced 3 of his close relatives to give their DNA so they could create a familial profile for Eddie. It was a match. Now a proven fact that Edward Geddes murdered his wife, Lina Reyes Geddes, and disposed of her body in the desert of southern Utah. Agent Brian Davis from the Utah Department of Public Safety said, "These cases are very difficult. They're tough. They can hit a lot more dead ends than successes. If Edward Geddes were still alive, we would pursue charges of homicide in connection with her death." Even though he was not brought to proper justice for what he did, investigators were ecstatic to bring closure to this case after 24 years. Davis said, "It's very, very fulfilling to be part of solving the case and the people coming together." The big question here is, if Lina was traveling from Ohio to Mexico, how did her body end up in Utah? Something we would all like to know. Unfortunately, Eddie took his own life and isn't here to tell us how or why he did what he did. But police speculate he killed her in Ohio, then drove her far from home in hopes she wouldn't be recognized, going as far as cutting off her fingertips. He killed himself 3 years after murdering Lina. Maybe it was guilt that did him in. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find much information on Edward Geddes to help understand the motive behind his crime. What happened to Lina Reyes Geddes was tragic, but I am so happy that her family finally knows where she is and what happened to her. That's it for the Maidenwater mystery. I chose this case myself because I love solved cold cases, but it's great to have story suggestions from my listeners. If you have a case you want me to cover on Killer Stories, you can email me at killerstoriespodcast@gmail.com. Follow me on social media. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at Killer Stories Podcast, and I'm on Twitter at Killer Story Pod. It is incredibly helpful to leave a rating on Spotify and or a written review on Apple Podcasts. I appreciate everyone who has done so. But as I've said before, spreading the word about killer stories to your true crime-loving friends is the ultimate compliment. If you want to show your support, You can visit buymeacoffee.com/killerstories for a one-time donation. Don't forget to check out Bar Forte Kaysville if you are a local to Davis County. Maybe I'll see you there. As always, thanks so much for listening. Until next time, this has been a killer story.